explain to you what's going through their head as they're answering the question, not just write down the answers. Right, let's see if we can swap that again. Okay, now if we start to combine the approach that we took in Explain Everything with some other apps on the iPad, then we start to have a lot of formative assessment feedback, and we've got some really powerful tools as teachers that we can use in the classroom. This app is Socrative, completely free app. There's a teacher version and a student version. The teacher version allows you to actually build quizzes, and then the student version allows the students to join your quiz and answer the questions. You can see here, these are multi-choice questions, but I've also got the option to put in free answer questions so that I can actually get the students to explain in a bit more detail. Now, the really nice thing for me as a teacher is that once we've finished the quiz, all that marking that I would have had to do if we'd done this on paper is actually done in the background by Socrative. At the end of the quiz, I can press a button and have this Excel spreadsheet emailed to me with all the right and wrong answers already highlighted, and I can see as a teacher, for example, if this question won, either I didn't do a very good job teaching it, or the students totally misunderstood what I was trying to teach them, and I probably need to go back and revisit that with most of the class. So I'm getting an awful lot of really useful feedback from apps like this, and I also just wanted to touch on Khan Academy. Lots of teachers have seen or heard of the videos that Khan Academy make available, and some of our teachers used to find it quite almost insulting that the students enjoyed the videos on Khan Academy more than they enjoyed sitting listening to their teacher. They'd come in having watched a video of the same thing the teacher had taught and said, it was explained really, really well. But one of the things that lots of teachers aren't aware of is if you go to khanacademy.org, you can create a free teacher account which allows you to create classes that your students can join, and then you can actually create individual learning pathways to support the students' learning. And you can keep an eye on where students are struggling. There's a huge amount of data available to you as a teacher. You can see where the students are spending their time. You can see the skills they've already mastered. You can see the areas of maths they're actively trying to avoid, which probably means they need to focus on those areas. And you can actually suggest areas for your students to focus on. You know, and we actually use this with two classes of our students that I guess the correct term is they were struggling with maths, but they were our lower ability maths classes. Now, the traditional approach at my school, I don't know if it's the same at your school, with these kind of students was, they came back on a Wednesday afternoon and they sat in a room with the teacher, and they could also see the areas where they're not spending very much time. So it actually has proved to be a really useful tool. In the trial that we did with the two of our kind of lowest ability high school maths classes, by spending an hour a week using Khan Academy, all of the students achieved at least one grade higher in their IGCSEs than their teachers had predicted, and most of them achieved 2 grades higher at least. And that was just in 5 months of us using Khan Academy. Actually, the students said it was much more motivating than having to come back on Wednesday afternoon and sit in the classroom for an hour. Now, as I said at the beginning, I also want to look at some really simple approaches to bring maths to life in a really real and kind of relevant way for students. This is actually a real worksheet that one of my grade 2 teachers used to use with her class. She would probably be mortified at the number of workshops that I've used it in. She had iPads in her classroom, and you've probably worked out, the students had to use a protractor, measure the angle, find the angle underneath. Now the teacher knew, because she had iPads in her classroom, there must be a better way to do this, and a more engaging way to do it. But she really didn't know where to start. She came to see me and said, we've got iPads in the classroom. I think I can probably use the camera to try and help students to understand angles, because angles are quite an abstract concept for most Year 2 students. So we wanted to turn this into something active, and I suggested to the teacher, well, let's have a look at using Keynote and the camera. And so the first thing the students did was walk around the school with their iPads, taking pictures of interesting angles that they saw around the school. And then they imported one of those images onto a slide, each in Keynote. And I'm going to take my life in my hands here. There's apparently a 5-second delay, that's why I'm counting to 5. Maybe I wasn't counting to 5 slowly enough. So let's open Keynote for a second. And you can see, here's a photo I took in the hall of our classroom. Now, one of the things that a lot of people don't know about Keynote is when I drop a line into Keynote, let's move it and join it up to our other line. When I actually drag the end of the line, I don't know if you can see there, but it's actually showing me the angle. And so all the students had to do was import one image onto each slide and then draw lines, and we asked them then to use text to actually mark the angle of the line on the pictures. And so that really dry, dull worksheet suddenly became a walk around school, taking pictures, and then coming back to the classroom and making a really visual presentation of the different angles that they'd found. You know, and you can obviously see there we've got a nice right angle, so there was lots of opportunities to have discussions with the students about what they'd found. Now, that actually worked so well in the primary school that we had high school teachers coming and saying, you're making maths too interesting in the primary school. And then they get to high school and we're doing all this work with worksheets and practice problems. And the students are saying, but maths is really interesting in primary school. And then we get to high school and it's suddenly not. So they then kind of challenged me to come up with something similar that they could do with high school students. So we actually came up with this activity. It's a real maths activity. This is actually where I live in Stavanger. And we drive home down this road every day. And every day for 3 years, my wife and I argued about which the quickest way home was. I thought this was the quickest way home. She thought that was the quickest way home. So we set it as a problem for our grade 10 students in maths. Now, the first thing the maths department said when I showed them this problem was, there's not enough information there for the students to answer the question. We need to give them some more information, like the car is moving at 25 miles per hour. There is a speed limit on this road. The distance from going that way is this. And that, I think, is the traditional way that you would approach maths. You give the students the kind of equations, and then they basically plug different numbers into the equations for practice. I deliberately, with this activity, didn't want to give them enough information to answer the question. Because my first question to them was, they all said, we can't answer that question. No, you're absolutely right. What do you need to know from me to be able to answer that question? You know, the students came up with all sorts of things like, are there speed bumps on the roads? How are you travelling? What's the weather like? All these kinds of questions that actually they do need to know in order to be able to come up with solutions to the problem. And for me, the really great thing about this approach is instantly we're getting the students discussing and engaging with maths, and they're starting to talk to each other about, well, how do we work out what the speed limits are on that road? How do we work out which is the longest distance? You know, and to me this is one of the keys to using technology well in the classroom. It's about getting the students actively engaged in the lesson, and it gives us some fabulous tools for doing that. One of the apps that we use a lot at school is called Mindly. Fantastic mind mapping app. One of the things I like about it so much is, like a lot of things on the iPad, it has a really, really simple interface. So you start just with a really simple kind of circle, and you can click on the pluses to add the nodes onto your mind map. But actually the students are then focused just on one area of mind map, and they don't have to kind of think about this whole big concept map, which actually for some students is quite hard to understand. They're focusing on one little part at a time, and actually that makes it much easier for the students. So, back to the problem. Once the students, because I'm sure you're all dying to know whether I was right or my wife was right, but once the students have discussed and they've worked out what information they need to know, then we can start to come up with solutions to the problem. And I'm sure if there's maths teachers sat here, you've worked out what the kind of key to working out this problem is. When I took the picture, I actually did a screen grab from maps, and one of the things I was very careful to do was to actually make sure there's an object on the map that we can work out the size of. A football pitch is a standard size. So actually, if we can measure using that same really simple technique that we used in the angles example, if we draw a line in Keynote from here to here, you probably noticed when I showed you the angles example that the line also tells you how many pixels it is. So if we know how many pixels the football pitch is in this map, and we know how big a football pitch is in real life, suddenly we've got a way of actually working out the distances depending on which route you go. So we can then use that, again, really simple idea of just drawing lines from the car all the way home. And actually the students, what we asked the students to do was to record the distance of each of their lines into a numbers document, and then use an equation to actually calculate the conversion from pixels into meters. So, interestingly as well with this, there are lots of different answers. One of the things that I find interesting with maths is, maths in a classroom usually has just one right answer. You're either right or wrong. And maths in real life is never that straightforward. Maths in real life, there's usually multiple answers to the problem. And that's what we had here, because students will measure the distances differently. Some of the students slightly over-measured the football pitch, and so their conversion was slightly different to other students. But actually, the important thing here is not the right answer, it's all the maths that they're going through to get to those answers. So, just to kind of answer the question for you, just got a few lines there. So I measured the football pitch at 137 pixels, which means one pixel is about 0.88 of a metre. And actually when the students measured this, they found out what I knew all along, which was I was right and my wife was wrong. She wasn't very happy about the fact we turned this into a maths problem just to prove that she was wrong. Just wanted to highlight Wolfram Alpha app. Even if you don't know what the size of the football pitch is, you can obviously go off and Google it. But Wolfram Alpha is a fantastic app for asking really quite complex questions, and it will go off and find answers for you. I mean, this, as a question for Wolfram Alpha, this is actually a very, very simple question. So, just to kind of summarise, from that real problem, which was really very simple, screen grab from maps, dropped into Keynote, we've actually come up with all sorts of opportunities for students to collaborate, discuss, use mind mapping apps. We can use something like Showme, the app on the iPad, for sharing the work back to the teacher or with other students. They've used apps like Numbers, Wolfram Alpha, My Script Calculator to actually do the research and find the answers to the problems. And then when we gave this to the students, they were able to also use their creativity. So we had students handing in all the research and solutions that they'd come up with as a digital book. They pulled it all together in Book Creator. We had other students that used Explain Everything and made a little video explaining what the right answer to the problem was. We had another group of students that actually in their free time went and filmed the 2 routes home and actually made a little video explaining which was the quickest route home. That was a great one to show my wife. So, just to kind of finish off, I just wanted to touch on real data, because over the last year or so I've spent a lot of time working with maths teachers, and one of the things that say to me is, it's pretty hard to get hold of real data. And I'm like, really? You have an iPad in your hand, there's a world of data there. One of the apps we used a lot is a weather app called Wonder Station. There's all sorts of weather apps for the iPad, and you can see just from this screenshot, there is all sorts of data here that the students can actually collate into a numbers document. And actually, this was a weather station that was sat on top of our school. So what better way to make things like that real to the students than by asking them to compare local weather to weather in other areas of Norway, other parts of the world. Another app that our teachers use called QuakeFeed gives you real-time notifications about earthquakes. And actually the maths department combined together with the geography department to come up with a cross-curricular project. It's a maths project that asks the students, why do earthquakes happen in certain parts of the world but are very rare in others? Now, as well as having to collect data, they also needed to understand the geography concepts about the causes of earthquakes in order to be able to answer that question. And then one final app, which is one of my favourites on the iPad, this is called Plane Finder HD. And it provides huge amounts of data in real time about planes flying all over the world. So you get things like the speed the plane's travelling, the angle that the plane is travelling at, the time it left, the time it will arrive. So there's all sorts of data there that you could pull into a much bigger maths challenge. Our primary school teachers actually use this to create a band world tour challenge where in English the students came up with the name of the band and they described their band, and then in maths they had to plan a world tour to 10 different locations around the world and then use apps like this to work out how long it would take to get to each place, how much time they needed to leave between each concert in each part of the world to get to the next place. And suddenly, from taking a simple app like this and a really simple idea, you've got this really real and engaging task for the students to do. I'm going to stop talking there. Thank you all very much for listening and for putting up with the technical difficulties. I'll be around for a while afterwards if you want to come and talk to me about any of what I've shown you over the last 20 minutes, and thank you all very much for listening.